night like tonight's pretty cold. A lot of people are going to be out on the street. Temperature is definitely low. You know, it's concerning. You know, you think there's all these people that have to sleep out tonight. They have to figure out a way to stay warm and in most cases not freeze to death. Betty had told me yesterday, you know, they know, a lot of the times people know places they can sleep to stay warm, whether it's in like an elevator or a stairwell, like parking garages. Sometimes it's fields. There's some open fields around town anymore. Spring Creek Trail, I know, is another location where a lot of people hang out. I mean, it's just bitter. It was bitter during the day. It's bitter now. If you can't go to one of the shelters because you have a drug problem or another issue, you're stuck out here. And, you know, you might stay with a friend here and there, but, you know, it's dark, it's cold. Betty also told me that a lot of women connect themselves to men because that's a little bit of safety. And if you're not connected to somebody that might keep you safe, that you're camping out with, you know, the chances of sexual assault are pretty high. And even just physical assault, attacks, people stealing your money. You know, it's unfortunately really scary for a lot of people. You don't have a lot of options on what you get to do. I'm lucky I live in a pretty safe town. It's a really nice town, but at the same time, because the cost of living is so high here, there's more and more people that end up without a home because they can't afford the rent. And the way that the minimum wage is versus the cost of living, you know, people just don't make enough money. Currently, the waiting list for Fort Collins is about 2 years to get into income-based housing without children. I'm not sure on with children. There's not a lot of options for people that don't make a lot of money. You know, in a 2-bedroom apartment's about $1,200 a month. You're looking at $600 each if there's 2 people living there. And, you know, some people barely make that much each month. And if you're on minimum wage, you know, you're going to be lucky to bring home $900 of your paycheck. You know, if you have a car payment, if you got to pay for gas, if you got to, you know, it gets really hard really fast.
When Ken first founded Homeless Care, I think it came as a surprise. There weren't other organizations in Colorado who were doing this work. We have a very harsh climate. It's cold. It snows a lot. You know, Fort Collins tends to be a little bit more moderate or temperate than some of the other places in the state, but it's still cold, very cold in the winter. And so, you know, people here face unique challenges. Regardless of how many shelter beds there are in our community, there are always people sleeping outside. And in the wintertime, that's a very dangerous proposition. So we see it as our mission and our responsibility to make sure that those people who are sleeping outside have the ability to meet their basic needs when they do. Homeless Gear is a Fort Collins-based nonprofit that provides a continuum of services to people who are experiencing homelessness. We have programs that help people survive in the short term, connect to resources in the interim, and link to employment and housing and self-sufficiency in the long term.
One of the biggest things and one of the biggest myths that we're constantly trying to dispel is this idea that people want to be homeless. And I think by far the reasons that people tell us that they're homeless are related to employment. They're either not employed or they're underemployed. A lot of people are on benefits, but they'd rather be employed, and they just can't necessarily find a job that either gives them the hours or the salary that they'd like. Housing costs, of course, in Fort Collins and really throughout Colorado right now are a huge barrier for people. And so those are the types of reasons that we hear. It's not through anybody's fault, even though people may make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes, but it's gotten to the point for some individuals where they just haven't been able to quite move out of homelessness back into housing on their own. And so I think really dispelling that myth around, you know, people deserve this or they want this, and that's just not the case. Even when we hear about people saying, oh no, I'm good, I don't mind this lifestyle, you know, a lot of times there's so much underlying that. It's a lot of pride at not being able to necessarily find housing on their own. It may also be a sense of altruism, where I think a lot of people have formed really tight bonds with other people who are homeless, and they see themselves, if they can if they turn down a shelter bed, or if they turn down a voucher, somebody else, that in their eyes needs it more may get it. And so there's just all these factors that go into, once you start really asking somebody what it's about, it's just not, it's not a reality that I think is really there in the community. I think what's interesting is that homelessness is so varied from individual to individual, but then you see a lot of commonalities from community to community. And so, in virtually every community, you're going to have people who are staying outside or may need to sleep in a shelter bed, while you're going to have other people who identify as homeless who are staying doubled up or staying in a motel. You're going to have people who are very young. You're going to have kids who are homeless. You're going to have senior citizens who are homeless. You're going to have individuals with disabilities, individuals who have gone through a divorce or a family breakup. So I would say the variety really comes in the individual stories rather than across a lot of communities.
Mine's pretty stereotypical. I would consider is what got me there is drugs. I did not do drugs, but the people who I was a dependent of chose to partake. My mom and my dad were both meth addicts and just didn't make good choices. I wasn't actually homeless until I was about 13, 14 years old. But we experienced a lot of instability, and homeless to me is kind of a broader term. A lot of people think homeless is just, people without a roof over their head, when really I consider myself having been homeless a few years, when really much of that time a roof was over my head, but it was never home. It was sometimes a car, a lot of times friends' houses, rarely family members, and I just relied a lot on the kindness of strangers and those around me. So it's kind of, when people ask me how long I was homeless and what those circumstances were, I always kind of start by putting that in perspective for some people, because it's not as if I was living in a ditch for years, but it feels the same in a lot of ways, because you're starved for resources that basic people, those basic needs that a lot of people take for granted every day. So it was during my time being homeless, I still managed to stay in school. It was still hard because, especially being a homeless younger person, students are cruel. We all know that, and they don't know your situation, and so I was in rags a lot and didn't always get to shower and didn't have food for lunch, and a lot of times couldn't fill out necessary paperwork to get those resources because you need parents' information, and I didn't have my parents' information. Most of the time when I was homeless, I was separated from both my parents, so I didn't know how to get a hold of them ever, and so it was really hard. I usually had to forge documents, and my friend's parents would have to take me places, and they didn't even have my social security number, and it was just there's a lot of factors and challenges and obstacles to get over there. So I think that was the hardest part, is maintaining. It's just so hard to maintain a lifestyle and get where you need to be, because without the help of others, you really can't do it. A lot of people.
I was in high school, and I'm not going to go into details, but I got blamed for some weed that was in my parents' house. So I was kicked out. I was staying at the Mission while I was going to high school for about 2 months, and then I was missing 2 classes a day because of the bus schedule, and I wasn't able to complete it. So I've been on the streets and just been trying to to find work and get by.
How long has that been? 3 years? Okay.
3 or 4. I have no idea, honestly. It might be more.
Okay.
I got into drugs with my ex. We lost our house, we lost our kids. He went to jail, I ended up out on the streets. And it's been about 2 years. I met him when he was still in a house. And then the water and electricity cut out and we went into foreclosure, so then we were living in a tent for a while. And then the city made us take down our tent, even though it was in a friend's backyard. It was his own property, his ID.
Okay.
So they look for jobs, and it's really hard to get an ID without proof of mail.
Okay.
Yeah, you can't use
Like
the
no
Murphy
utilities
Center,
or car
that shouldn't be
insurance and stuff
allowed.
like that. Yep.
Yes, if you
Well,
can't use
I-
the Murphy Center.
They
Yeah,
used to
spend-
give vouchers to get your ID too, and nobody gives them out anymore.
Would
So
you?
we got the money saved up, but we're just
Okay.
waiting on 2 proofs of mail.
Okay.
It has to be computer generated mail. It can't be
I've
like a
got
handwritten letter.
some like.
The challenging issue we've faced over the past couple of years and really came to a high point this summer regarding disruptive behaviors in downtown, but also a shared public spaces ordinance, expansion of location diversion, and also crime prevention through environmental design. Let me stress that any one of these or all of these could be done as a pilot, so please keep that in mind as we go through these. Or benches in the downtown. We could also regulate the manner and duration that people can occupy the benches. Again, it could be a pilot. If you're going to choose it as a pilot, we think it would be important to do it for at least a year so we can gather data to determine whether or not such an ordinance would be effective or not. The recommended enforcement area, should you decide to go down this path, would be the same as the smoking ordinance, which is downtown, and that's for consistency. And here's a quick map. I think most of you know this. This is the east and west side of College from roughly Maple south down to Olive. Plea deals for citations for people to agree not to be downtown for a set period of time. The length of time for that diversion would be based on the behavior and prior violations.
Yeah, just a couple questions. Obviously, when we talk about this sit-lie ordinance, let's call it what it is, and there's obviously some legal challenges, and so I just don't think it's appropriate. It's difficult for me to support ordinances or laws that based on a person's station in life. So I think that's a very careful thing that we have to.
From the standpoint of Homer 2020, we really push for housing first approach, saying, let's help somebody get into housing, and then we can start talking about what other issues they may be dealing with and how we can help get them healthier and help get them towards a path of greater self-sufficiency. Well, I certainly think red tail ponds and opening permanent supportive housing that really is being labeled as a model for not just Colorado but really the nation, being able to say how do we take the best practices and what we know works for those individuals who are chronically homeless, who are very vulnerable, who all are dealing with disabilities, and provide a space that is safe and that they want to come home to. That's certainly been one of the, I think, biggest changes that we've seen in the last couple of years. Also in the community, I think we've just seen a level of awareness around homelessness and people being very interested in the topic from a variety of angles. And so, a job of mine is to really figure out how do you get these different perspectives, people coming to the table, all looking at homelessness through a different lens, and start to find some common ground around what can be done. But having that interest and that awareness in the community is going to be the first step for Fort Collins to be able to really take meaningful action. And
generally speaking, this is a very complex issue that impacts, of course, first and foremost, it impacts the people who are actually experiencing homelessness. But it also has impacts on the community at large, whether that's residents, tourists, businesses, college students. It does have sort of an impact on everyone. And so I don't want to diminish the concerns of a business owner who has an objection to somebody who's panhandling in front of the store. I'm not a business owner. It's impossible for me to say realistically how that would impact my business if I had one. So I think it's important that we consider the perspectives of everyone. Generally speaking, I think some of the fears in our community around the issue of homelessness are just based on misconceptions about who is homeless, and what it means to be homeless. Unfortunately, there are cases of a few people causing disruptions downtown, but that's going to be the case with any population. The problem with the homeless population is that they're very visible. They're downtown all the time. They're outside. They don't have a place to go at night necessarily, other than the shelters. And so private issues get carried out in a public space. And so while I understand the concerns that people raise in the downtown area, I would also say that by and large, people who are experiencing homelessness are just like everyone else. They're struggling with the same things that everyone else is struggling with, plus they're struggling with the fact that they're homeless. The vast majority of people who we work with slip in and out of homelessness very quickly, and no one would ever even know they're homeless. I don't have the numbers on me right now, but a large percentage of our homeless population is represented by families in Fort Collins. And so I think it's important to remember that homelessness really doesn't just affect one segment of our population. It represents it impacts a broad cross section of our community. And has broad impacts across our community. It requires a broad vision and a number of solutions. To your question about some of the policies that have been discussed, I'm actually fairly encouraged by the fact that our city council rejected a couple of the policies recently that I think would have had some negative impacts on people experiencing homelessness. And it's not just because I don't just oppose some of those policies because they would negatively impact people experiencing homelessness. Although I do oppose them for those reasons, I also oppose them because I don't believe that they work regardless. So I think you're essentially, with a policy such as, making it against the law to sit down or lie down in a public space or on the sidewalk, I don't believe that's a solution that has any sort of long-term significant impact. I think it's a Band-Aid solution that might make a few people happy, but won't actually impact the issue of homelessness, won't actually impact disruptive behaviors in the downtown area. So I guess broadly speaking, I'm not in favor of policies that criminalize homelessness, both because they have impacts that are negative on people experiencing homelessness, but also because I don't think they have the intended positive outcomes for the community either. I think there are better things we could be doing.
Most notable one is we partner with Slice and United Way to do Project Homeless Connect as part of Homework 2020, and most people who live in the area are familiar with that. That's our one-day, one-stop shop for people experiencing homelessness or in need of services like the basics. So we have clothing and food. We serve, the 2 meals that day, so breakfast and lunch. But the really neat part of that I like the most is those services that not everyone really thinks about, and that's family portraits and veterinary services for pets and auto checkups and just a bunch of cool things, haircuts. I mean, the list goes on and on. things that people experiencing homelessness not only don't have access to, but that could really make a difference in alleviating their situation. So that's big.
I think homelessness has become a much more visible issue in our community. Whether or not the scope of the problem has expanded significantly, I'm not so sure. It has. We've seen some growth in the homeless population, but the numbers aren't huge, and they really are sort of in line with overall population growth. But I do think what we've seen is much more community attention focused on the issue of homelessness, for better or worse, and more organizations working to address the issue of homelessness. On the positive side, I think what we've really seen in the last few years is better alignment of resources. We have a lot of services in our community, and historically, I think those services really were working within their silos, and we've seen a very concerted effort from all of the nonprofits in our community to come together around a collective vision. To make homelessness rare, short-lived, and non-recurring, and I think we're making strides toward that vision that we would not have been able to make 5 years ago, 10 years ago, because the resources weren't as aligned as they are now.
So do you think going forward, going into the future, things will just continue to improve?
I would
From the
like
individual level to the community, to the state, to the nation, to the world, it's going to always be a problem, and that's because there's so many variables involved. And people, like you said, are homeless for different reasons. Some do choose to put themselves in that situation. Others are put in that situation and can't get out. Others, it's temporary and they get themselves out pretty quickly. So I think it's just trying to steer clear of putting people in those boxes. It's difficult. So I just say we need to keep an open mind. And a lot of times, the best thing you can do is smile and say a kind word. I mean, when I was younger and I would be on the street or something, I got a lot of just weird looks, a lot of skeezy people just trying to take advantage of you. Come along the way, as do a lot of really judgmental people who think you're just a punk kid who probably ran away from home or, is disobedient. And those people like you who, if you're lucky enough to meet, that just smile, lend you a helping hand, or maybe just even wish you a good day or good luck, or say some just words of encouragement.
And that can make
And it doesn't take much. It takes nothing. You lose nothing by doing that. I see so many people walk by, homeless people or just transients in general, and just sneer at them and just say things under their breath, or to the people they're talking to that are just nasty. And that, if you don't want to give them money, if you don't want to feed into their lifestyle, if you don't want to do any of that, that's fine. But what do you possibly stand to gain by acting like that? And what do you stand to lose by just smiling and wishing them a good day?
Through housing, and it doesn't mean that someone still won't have to work on getting a better job or getting healthy or any of the other things that may come along with kind of taking those next steps. But ultimately, the difference between someone who's homeless and someone who's not is housing.